Hey guys, welcome back to the second episode of the podcast. Today we have a special treat where we're going to be documenting someone who has had multiple experiences both leading a studio and also working as a 3D artist. He's incredibly talented. I've known him for a little bit of time here, and he is very passionate. He leads, he's a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons, and also he has a real strong heart for how faith connects with his art and how faith connects with his work. Passionate about the games industry, has a lot of strong opinions about it, and we're going to get into all of that today. Thank you so much, and I'm going to introduce here Graham. Hey Graham, how you
Hey
doing?
guys, hey, it's good to meet you all, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, super excited to kind of have you on here. So, as we know, we're in the process of documenting amazing builders and amazing artists that are Christians and are really building the next cathedrals, the next castles of our faith. And so, love to have you on. And then why don't you go ahead and give the audience kind of your 30-second pitch about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I'm a 3D game artist. I've run my own studio working on a game called Allegory. It was a vertical slice to pitch publishers, and I've started working with a group of guys recently on a game called Hivebreaker, and I'm the lead 3D artist on that.
That's awesome. So how long have you been doing 3D art? And how long have you been kind of like both self versus professional? How long have you been doing that for?
So I've been working in 3D art using 3ds Max since probably around 2011, and I started freelancing around 2015. Right before that, I worked at Epic Games, and I was working at like Red Storm, and then I started my own art studio.
Wow, so a lot of experience in the actual games industry, it looks like, right? Have you worked in any studios that, or on any games that our audience might know? What are some of the big games that you might have touched on?
I think the biggest game I've worked on, and I exclude like my QA and quality control, but as like an artist, I worked on Polybridge 3 in 2022 to 2023. So Polybridge 3, yeah. I worked on 5 of their environments.
Wow, and that was somewhat of an indie success story.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. I would say it was. Yeah, they already had a big following before that. They did really good marketing, and it was a great experience working with the team. And I feel honestly blessed that I even got picked up. It was a good experience.
And I know that you're a Christian, right? Early on, as you're entering into the game industry, how did your faith start to connect with some of the things you're doing? Did you ever have a struggle with how the faith might have interacted with your games or your art, or how did that start off for you when you were beginning?
So small story relevant to this question. When I was working at one of the 2 companies that I had mentioned, I won't list which one, but it got kind of tough working on it, and they eventually decided to let me go, and that was the decision that I made, that I was never going to work for like a big AAA studio again, because I wanted to feel like I was in control of my own life. And I started my own studio called Inigmas Studios, and it was just freelance game art. And at the beginning, it was me creating art for the Unity Assets store. And for about a year, I created, and this is probably around 2015 or so, I created art for a year with a guy named Leo, and he's from like Sweden. He was great to work with, and we created a really good portfolio for ourselves. I did the modeling and the PR and brought the clients in. He did like the painting, and for about a year we did that. And I remember one day the sales were just not coming in with the Unreal or with the Unity Assets store. It was just they were tapering. They weren't like bringing in money, and I remember really stressing. That was a really hard part. That was probably the lowest point in my life. After leaving one of those 2 studios and then starting my own studio, and then having to move back to your parents' house and just getting your life together and trying to rebuild your life basically from where you were. I remember like one day just laying in bed and having all these bills piling up at the end of the month, really relying. I mean, I was living on like rice and like bread and sandwiches. I think I spent like $20 a month on groceries back in like 2015. That's all I could afford, on top of like rent and everything that I was being asked to, I was being charged to pay, and like help pay with utilities, help pay like rent and stuff like that. And I remember one day laying in bed and just asking God, I'm like, God, will you please help me? I really need help. And it was at that point was like, I felt like I couldn't do anything on my own. There's not anything I could do laying in bed right now. So I was like, I just give myself fully to you. Will you please help me find my way? And it felt like he answered my prayer saying, Graham, you need to switch from doing art for the Unity Asset Store and start freelancing. And it just kind of like all these ideas started coming to me as if he were like helping me find my path, my way. And I ended up switching to freelancing. And with that portfolio, everything just started falling into place. Like I had been sharing the art that I was working on for these asset packs that I was, because I was making decent-ish money with the asset packs because I was promoting them. So people were seeing my art. And when I went in to do freelance, it was like a switch. It was like switching from doing me working for free basically and only making money from asset pack sales to going to working with a rate. So I had like one or two people that really helped me along the way figure out like what my rate should be. And it was basically the building step, going from the lowest point of my life to going into freelancing. And eventually Leo, he had like a kid and he ended up finding work for himself. And we had a good run. And then I started painting my own art. And it felt like it was thrown right into the fire though, when you're having to start doing your own stuff. So I started painting and now I've become a lot stronger as a painter. And I would say it's like if you're, it's kind of a hard experience to say. I think I'm stronger now, even painting my own stuff, than it was when him and I were working together.
Wow. Okay.
And I've worked at a few studios here and there, and some of them are just like guys that need art in their spare time. Like just like if you were to hire me and you had a game idea and I have no idea, that's kind of the problem with like freelancing, I would say. Correct me if I'm derailing or anything.
You're perfect.
But one of the things I've noticed about freelancing is you can't always be choosy with your clients, because sometimes, especially if you're just starting out, you're just trying to build a clientele, but you don't know if your clientele is actually going to ship that game. You have to be really lucky with the client has already got a prototype of his game and now he actually just needs art, versus someone who is just kind of starting out. They're working on art in like their side. This is like a side hustle. They have their main job and they're starting to need art and you have no clue if it's ever going to like ship, And
that's actually an interesting thing that I actually want to go a little bit into that. So a lot of people think that, especially when they're younger, right, that some freelancing is some sort of an ideal, right, where you get to work, pick and choose your hours, and you get to work with different clients and these kinds of things. But the reality is that freelancing might be very different than that, especially in the games industry, right? Now, the games industry uses a lot of contractors, uses a lot of freelancers. But in your experience, you highlighted something which is interesting, which is the game might never ship, right? Talk about the importance of, what is it, why shipping games is actually an important thing for your work as a freelancer. How does that impact your kind of career there?
I think time is probably the biggest aspect, because let's say that you have been a freelancer your whole career, and let's say your career is like sometimes 10 years at minimum, sometimes like 20 years at maximum. Let's say that you're 10 years in and you've only been kind of working on the side, working with like clients, and they don't actually ship a game. So what do you have for your 10 years that you've done? It's hard to like, you can't, sometimes it's hard to be picky and choosy. And that's part of like you as like a freelancer, you have to have like kind of an overview of the trajectory of your career. You have to really push yourself. You can't just settle and do like decent art, or you really have to push yourself. And it's easy to say that in a third person, talking about what you should and shouldn't do, but day in, day out, you always got to like really push yourself, because if this game doesn't ship, you'll have like a portfolio piece, but at the end of the day, the portfolio piece only goes so far. The game credit is what pushes you to get picked up. And that's what pushed me to get picked up at like for Dry Cactus for Poly Bridge 3. I had a decent portfolio, and I had I was just working at a studio prior to that, and the game didn't ship, and I just put out a lot of really good art, and I was showing people that art, and it got seen. And then I got picked up.
That's really interesting, because the credits, having your name in the credits, is perhaps the biggest and the most important thing that can impact someone in the games industry, right? Like having that validation of my name was there in the shipped game, and then the success of that game almost determines future opportunities for what you might be doing. So you kind of have to be, you can't be picky because there's a limited amount of projects, but you kind of have to be to some extent where you want to pick projects that actually would matter for your future, right? So it's a balancing act. Now, everyone who enters into the games industry, right, and even someone looking outside and looking in, thinks of the games industry as just people who are fueled by passion, fueled by an amazing, they grew up playing games and they're fueled by that energy that comes from game. Talk about like how that plays into what you do and the importance perhaps of craft, because something like 3D art may sound like pure passion, right? But how does the intersection between that and craft, get in? Like, how do you progress in your craft of doing that rather than just pure passion, right?
Say it one more time in like one sentence, and I'm trying to process the question. Sorry.
Sure. So a lot of people enter in with passion being the primary driver, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reality of being good and being focusing on your craft, right? You said that you're a better artist now than you were before, right?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that journey, right? Do you feel like passion is still the most important thing in the games industry, or do you feel like it's shifted more towards you actually becoming a better artist as far as your success is concerned in the games industry?
I think passion, especially like during downtime, your passion is what keeps your love for doing 3D art, for me at least. Like I'll go and I'll play a game. Like I'm playing what is this game? I have it right here. Hold on. I'm just gonna look at the title. Hold on. It's called Wrath Aeon of Ruin. I like those old like boomer shooters, really.
Mm-hmm.
So this game, I look at like the art style and it's like, wow, that is an awesome old school, almost like PlayStation 1 style, but using Unreal Engine with all of its like different type of specularity and PBR, but using the old school retro stuff. I really like those kind of like art styles and stuff, on top of like the hand painted stuff and all that. So like your passion keeps you like in the game from like burning out. Now, like part of like growth, you were talking about like growing. You're gonna do art that you just don't care about. Honestly, part of your passion is just doing something you really want to do. Like a lot of times, I just want to like freaking model swords and paint them, and not model trash cans and signposts and cliff sides and trees. But that's part of it sometimes. So. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, that's actually really good, because a lot of people tell me that no matter how good they get, or all of the other things in the games industry, the passion is still you have to preserve your passion. You cannot just fall into the business of the industry and all of that stuff. You still have to preserve that passion, because that is what's going to keep you going, essentially, right? Otherwise, you will burn out and you'll give up at some point. So passion is still a very important thing, and a lot of people might think, conflicting, opinions about, should I pursue passion or should I pursue more of a business, or, those kinds of things. But it's both. You have to have that intersection. So let's actually shift a little bit to talking about studio, right? So what was your experience like starting a studio, going from freelancing to starting your studio? What was that like for you?
Tumultuous, but exhilarating. I think those two adjectives really describe it. Because tumultuous, because I'm not like business savvy at all, and I feel like a lot of people, they like the idea of having control over their own game, and they like that aspect, the development part, getting your hands into like the dirt and everything, and just molding something together. And there's a whole business side. There's a whole creating like a pitch deck for your game. There's finding the publishers and then writing all the publisher emails. You actually have to find their email and find publishers that are relevant to you. And it's not just sending out like 3 or 4. But it was exhilarating too, because I used like my experience from studios I worked at, especially like Dry Cactus, with like everything I took away from working there and how they ran it, and other studios I've worked at as well. And I put my all into that. I was like the producer, and I was the lead 3D artist, and I was the game designer. And then I hired like 2 programmers. And we created, in 6 months or so, we created a fully playable co-op Zelda-like. And it was really fun. I thoroughly enjoyed the whole process, coming up with like the pipelines for how we were going to do like a modular dungeon, how we were going to do like the art style for the world, and the planning process behind it, and then making sure the team was like, we were hitting milestones, because I knew that like coming into this, like if we're going to do 6 months of the development, then usually the last month, if you have like 6 months or so, the last month should be like almost like no development. It should be like at most maybe like your UI and stuff, and but it should be like polished and stuff. So you really have like 5 months. So then you got to break down what goes into each month, and then you have like milestones for these, and like you can't account for everything. So I would develop for like 70 to 80% of the game, and then let the last 20 or 30% be organically, let the game have its own identity.
Yeah. And there's just everyone describes that as just a good, chaotic, exciting stress. That's what everyone kind of describes it as. Something that I always like to ask that's very popular is like, okay, so one day you're working a job, right, and then you quit, right, and you say, okay, I'm going to take the jump and I'm going to start a studio, right? What is that? What is that? Once you do that, what does that feel like? What is that? Are you like excited now? Are you overwhelmed? Did you already have a idea of what you wanted to do and the people that you wanted to work with right at the beginning, or was that more of a discovery phase? And also, were you scared, right, in that process?
Oh, yes. I think fear and the uncertainty of if it was going to succeed was certainly a really big factor in this. And no, it was definitely a discovery phase. I remember 2023, May 2023, Dry Cactus and the leads on there were like, all right, we are ending development in 1 month. So this was like late April. They're like, you guys, just so you know, we're cutting off everyone from the team basically in like a month, and then we're going to start recouping, like we're going to start making sales and stuff. We're releasing in May. So they're like, you have a month. We're going to keep you on for this last month. You'll do a little QA and stuff like that. All of our art was done. So they were keeping us on for another month until the end of May or something, at the beginning of May. And they said, you can start looking for more work now, and we'll keep you on for that last month, which was really nice to give us that. But I had already seen in 2023 the trajectory of like the game industry. And, you go on LinkedIn, you see people are getting laid off left and right, and their game studios, companies going under. And I saw the trajectory and I was like, I'm not going to be able to find work. Juxtaposed to like leaving a studio that a friend had hired me to work on for like 9 months. And then I left that studio after 9 months working there. And then within a month, Dry Cactus picked me up. But it was like a light switch. It was like just 1 year later, you're not going to be able to find work at all because of the state of the game industry. So I saw this trajectory. I'm like, all right, well, maybe I should start my own studio. I had squirreled away like I think I had like 30 grand saved up, not a whole lot. So I couldn't pay like full-time employees and everything, like, a nice comfy salary, but I had something I could start with. So I started applying places, and I was in the back of my mind whether I should start my own studio. And after a bunch of declines, like everyone's getting nowadays, I just made the decision. I called like family. I talked to my fiance, and they all kind of like, you should give it a go. You should try it. So
Awesome.
what I started doing is I put about 2 months into like pre-production planning. I created a vertical slice guide of like everything I want to achieve in a period of like 5 to 6 months. And my fiance had worked with a student person who just graduated from like my local technical college, Wake Tech Community College. And I reached out to him, and we started working together, and we got like the bare bones of the thing going. And then eventually I hired another programmer to work with me who was more tech savvy with like the networking side. And he basically manned like most of the projects, and I was able to pay them like $1,000 to $2,000 a month. But like when you got 3,000 or 30,000 or so, $25,000 to $30,000, and you're paying about only 3,000, which is not a lot, but it starts going like 5 times 3,000. That's like 15,000. Right? Is that my math right? I think so. 5, something like that. So it starts going pretty quickly. So I also hired a buddy of mine that I've worked with for a long time, David McKee, one of the best audio engineers I know, and musicians. And I hired him to do all the sound effects and the music for our vertical slice. And I knew some of the people, and then I didn't know some of them. I also hired a talented animator who did the rigging and skinning for all the 4 or 5 creatures we had, and the character, and that was about it. And he was really good. He was like an industry veteran person that I put an ad out on LinkedIn, a work, like looking to hire someone for work, and I hired him through that.
And so you were leading the studio, right? And
yeah.
Okay. And you had about a couple of people there that you were paying to work with you. Right?
Yeah. It was basically a 3 to 4 man studio. Most of the time it was 3 people, and then it would go up to 4 people, and then it'd go back down to 3 people when the 4th person finished their work, and then another person would come on. Like the audio came much later in the development cycle. Just because we had more of the game fleshed out for him to kind of have an understanding to, resonate with him for what he would need to do.
And something that always is very curious for someone who's starting a studio is, what is the team dynamics like? How did you guys work together? Did you guys have a process? that you follow that worked for you. That's something that a lot of people ask for. Should I have a GDD or should I not have a GDD? Or like, what was that process like for you guys and your team? What worked for you guys to build this vertical slice?
So the best way I could answer that is a little bit of information, and I'll get right to that. So I've worked in studios where there was a game designer, but he did not organize the team, or he didn't organize like his thoughts well into the GDD, and it really came down to like people would be like, "Hey, so what are we doing?" They would have to be asking questions that should be information that's like provided in like a task card or something on Trello, but the GDD wasn't organized, so they had to keep going to the game designer and asking constant questions because the GDD wasn't like fleshed out. So I wanted our game, with as like sophisticated as it was, I wanted it to be I wanted there to be a level of structure. So like I said, I got the game to about like an 80% development mark in terms of like planning and stuff, leaving the last 20 or 30%. It was like 70 to 80% complete with all the production planning, pre-production planning done. And I wanted it to be more or less organic. And then I fit what I thought I could fit into a 6-month dev cycle, and I broke it down. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. So it looks like you guys had a little bit more of a structured approach, which is great.
I kept this very structured, and of course there were like like the lead programmer on the team would be like, "Graham, can you jump into a call? I need to ask you some questions about this feature." And there's always going to be something you can't account for when designing something, like the sound of a sword swing, or what is the timing between how long should the sword be swung or something. Is it like a long sword or like a little dagger? And some intricate elements like that feel good. Does this feel good?
Yes.
You can't just plan that accordingly. Some of that just comes organically as the game starts to take an identity.
And different studios tend to have different cultures in how they work, right? Obviously, I've talked to some people who have essentially been very exploratory. They just go and they just try things out until they get some sort of element of fun and what works. And other people who have said, no, I like to have everything structured, from the beginning. It looks like you fall somewhere in the middle, where more in the structure side, but there's a level of exploratory element of it, right? And obviously you can't plan everything up front. That's just obvious, right? Unless you've already done the same type of games multiple times and you just know what you're doing when in terms of the vision of the game. But it's hard to plan everything up front, but it's always helpful to know that. Another thing that always comes up is this thing of, walk me through perhaps a day in the life or maybe a week in the life of, you're waking up and on Monday morning, and what does that look like for you as someone running a studio?
So I mentioned that I like a lot of structure, but I'm also very lenient. There were some days where like the programmer, one of the programmers, he had another job on the side. You just can't live on $1,000 a month, despite after like 6 months, that's like 15 grand. And I'm just a small guy trying to fund his own or bootstrap his own studio. So he had his own job, and Monday through Friday, he'd be doing that. And then in the off hours, he'd be working this. So some of those days, like he started burning out, and I'd give him like a day off. I'm like, just take a day off. And, I was very lenient when working with all my guys. And so a lot of times I just had, I wouldn't call it strict, but I was wanting them to be available at certain times, because we're all like integral cogs in the machine. And if we're all like, this is not necessarily relevant to like all studios, but in my experience, when you're working remotely, it's important for your team to be available to answer questions. Because if, let's say they have a question for me and I were to like have gone on vacation, that one detrimental question about something, they just can't move forward because it's like a cog that's not turning, right? Because I'm not available, or they're not available. So I just said, can you try to be available between like 9 and 5 p.m.? And try to be available. I know you have things that are going on in your life, but those are the hours that I'll be available to answer questions. And not all studios work the same way, and that's fine. But I think it's important for a line of communication to be available during working hours.
Yeah, and I think enabling decisions, enabling progress to just keep moving forward and not getting blocked is a really, really important step just when you're running a studio. Because when you're running a studio, it's you have to take you're the person that has to take it the most seriously as the owner, right? You have to be a servant leader, but you also have to take the project very seriously, because if you don't, it just kind of doesn't get done, right?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that happen, and there's also this existential, hey, like we might run out of money, so we have to make sure we hit certain deadlines, and that might mean being flexible, but there also needs to be that we can't get blocked for too long without us just pushing ourselves forward, essentially. And that's a really good insight into like team dynamics. Were you working something that like, so something that always comes up is, about how much should I work, right? Should I be balancing my work when I'm running a studio? How should that look like for me? Like what was like a work schedule like for yourself? Were you just kind of always on, or were you just taking, like, what was like a day in the life essentially for what you were trying to do?
Um, I set tasks for myself and my team, and I made sure that. And this is going to answer your question for me. But I had set up like Trello goals for
Nice.
my team and I, and I had like a month breakdown, and I broke down each of those months into like weeks. And usually it was like 3 weeks of development, with accounting for like people need off days. People just aren't going to be able to get some of those tasks done on time. So the last week would be like filler. So it's not just work. You account for like the human element. So like 3 weeks of development, 1 week of like buffer in there. So I kind of had a broad idea of what needs to get accomplished in a month. So breaking that down into like Trello tasks, producing for the team, I kind of had an idea of what I needed to get done. Whether it was, I tried to get as much of the game design done as I could before I got into like the main production line. So I'm not like in production hell, pre-production hell. So I kind of had an idea of what I needed to do in the morning all the way until the end. And sometimes I might have to work until like the later night to make sure that I'm accomplishing my week-long goal.
Yeah.
But not often.
Yeah. And that's always a balance, right? And working all the time is not always a solution either. Douglas Crockford, the creator of Jason, he actually said something very interesting out of the biblical thing, where he says, when you're planning your sprint, plan for 6 sprints of work, and 7th one just clean. Make sure that you go till the ground essentially. And that was like a good habit, because a lot of times you just keep pushing thing. Let's shift a little bit to talk about the publishing process, reaching out to publishers, reaching out to potentially customers and things like that. What was that like for you? When you're actually taking this, once you're done with that initial vertical slice, you have a pitch deck and things like that, and then now you're actually trying to get either funding or customers. Yeah, what was that process like?
So first off, I wasn't as successful with securing publishing, and I don't know if that's entirely because of my game. I'm going to be humble and say maybe it was part of my game, but it also could be because of the state of the industry, where just like companies are just not hiring very often right now. Publishers are also being very choosy about their titles and picking up new teams versus like people who worked at like Epic or Blizzard and then started their own small man team with industry professionals making their own game and then going to a publisher. But I'll say maybe something with my game. But the process was okay. It was a lot of like interviews, a lot of like cold emails and getting replies back, and a lot of the responses I got back for my game where we really like the art style, but we're not looking to pick up a retro kind of like game like Zelda like right now. So
okay,
I'm going to say maybe it was my style of game. Maybe it was the I saw that there was like a niche for where my game could have fit, but it didn't work out. And I have a playable vertical slice in my game, and I'm proud of what I accomplished. So
yeah, definitely. And so for someone who's trying to start a studio, right, and they're trying to build or at least acquire funding of some sort for their game, is there any piece of advice that you would have for the publishing process? Is there anything that you could kind of give them based on your learning?
Know your demographic. I think that's obvious, because apparently that was I've always wanted to work on like a Zelda game. I've always wanted to do that. That is just like creating an adventure game, whether it's a Zelda game or not. Just creating an adventure game has been something on my like bucket list for eons, like forever. Since I've been born, I wanted to do that. Starting with like Super Nintendo and stuff, and playing A Link to the Past, and so I've always wanted to do that. But know your demographic. Don't just necessarily develop a game that you want. You should study to see what is currently popular, because that's what publishers are looking at too.
So if you want to get funded, you should look at market signals.
Yeah.
Did you take the game by any chance to players? Or did you get any feedback from players at all?
I did. I had 2 public play tests during my 6-month dev cycle. Once when we had like prototype art, and again later when we had some art in the game. And I did everything over like Discord with like a Discord's like forum feature, and people were posting like bugs, and they were posting like feedback, and we collected all the feedback and fixed bugs, and we adhered to some of like their feedback, listening to it, and made some changes, and what would have like felt good. And
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think if this game, I think if Allegory would have been made like 8 years ago, before the state of the industry, I think that it would have succeeded. But I didn't have 30-something thousand laying around to invest in my own studio. So back then,
is the ultimate vision of your studio? What was like, if you were to kind of summarize that, would that be kind of making that Zelda, Breath of the Wild, or Tears of the Kingdom type of games? Is that what you guys were kind of passionate about?
I think that would be a little too ambitious to create like an open world game like that. I wanted to just create something a little bit smaller and create just like one dungeon, one small town, 4 enemies, like 2 weapon types, and just like pitch that. And but ultimately, the reason I started my own studio is because I'm 37, and I don't know if I want to do 3D art forever. As much as I love it, do I want to be like 45, 46 doing this, or do I want to one day have like a legacy, a studio that I built with my own IP, and maybe have 2 or 3 games and leave something to my kid, and they could take over. I want to have like a legacy and something that earns money, because I don't have any social security. I have no Roth, IRA, Roth, or any of that stuff, because as a freelancer, I'm just squandering as much money as I can away. And my plan is to was rather, because it's kind of up in the air right now, working on a game. I deferred back to my 3D art instead of running my own studio. But my plan was to create Allegory and maybe get it finished, obviously, and then created maybe Allegory 2 or something. But that was in the far future, just a legacy, later in the future. I wasn't planning for a second game. I wanted to get the first game out, but I wanted to have a legacy where these games are making me money, like it was for the Dry Cactus guys. They started with Polybridge 1, then they created 2, and then 3, and now they have these games on Steam, and they make the guy money, right? Like it generates revenue, the recoup. And I want to be my own like owner of my own studio, recouping funds after paying my team.
And that's actually kind of interesting, because thinking of studios as a way to preserve legacy, right? And everyone has a different vision for a studio, but it's actually kind of important to think about why you're doing a studio, because that impacts the kinds of projects, the kind of work, that you would be able to pick up. And talking about the wider sort of games industry, right? We're kind of seeing layoffs, and we're seeing all kinds of different things happening. Even very successful games after release are kind of letting go of their staff and kind of
like Marvel Rivals,
right? They're kind of letting go of the core team that has created that into cost optimized kind of teams, things like that. What do you think about like the future of the games industry in terms of your AAA and your indie? Like, how do you think this is shaping out? It's going to shape out in the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think is going to happen here with all of these things?
So I have a broad perspective of it, because I don't analyze like the game industry, like some of those like great analytical minds that you see on like LinkedIn that have thousands of people that follow them, and they see the trajectory and they study it, and that's not me. But I do see when I go on Steam that a AAA game comes out and it immediately is mixed or mostly negative. Now, not all games are like that. Like Doom: The Dark Ages just came out, and it's done pretty good for itself, and it just released like a day or 2 ago, I think, right? So I think that I think AAA may eventually go into like a recession, kind of like how it flopped back in like the 80s or whatever. And I think that indie might take over. But I don't analyze the market. I just see that there's a lot of indie growth right now. And I see that there's a lot of like flops. Like what's that game that came out, Concord, I think? I don't really remember.
Multiple hundreds of millions.
Yeah, it came out, and then within like 14 days, all the servers like shut down. I was reading some person's post on LinkedIn about that. I don't know if the game was Concord, but I think it was that. And
do you think that on the part of players and consumers that there is a growing desire to kind of step away from that step away from the AAA into indie games? Do you think that that's you're seeing that the players actually wanting different types of games than AAA is giving them right now?
Yes. I think that you could make a really good game, and then you could still be laid off in AAA. And like now, all these studios are. I just saw today that like EA is asking all of their people to now come in at least 3 days a week. They're not allowing you to work remote. So that kind of shafts a lot of people, right, that live really far away and they can't relocate, especially when like, what if you relocate for a studio and then the studio lays all of its people off and you're stuck in this other state or in this country if you moved from another country to the United States. So I think like indie is safer because they still allow you to work remote. Not all studios, but every single studio that I've worked with freelancing has been remote, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. How do you see the sort of Christian? You're obviously a Christian. How do you see the Christian games market, and what do you see the impact of that? Is there even a Christian games market out there? What opportunities do you see for faith-based creators in the space?
The only game that I can really think of is like this. It's not like something by Gate X or Bible X. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, and then they got crowdfunded, and I'm in contact with the guy. Like I shouldn't say in contact. We're friends on LinkedIn, if you want to call it friends. We're contacts on LinkedIn. Me and the studio dev guy, and I've talked to him a few times, but that's the only one I can really think of for like Christian games. I know my buddy David. He is working on, and I mentioned him earlier for the audio stuff. He's working on designing a Christian game right now, and I don't know too much about it, but it seems more niche. So it's unfortunate, but that's kind of like how it is. If I could, I wouldn't mind working on a Christian game. I think that would be excellent.
Yeah, 100%. And I think part of the thing behind what we're doing here is highlighting opportunities for investors and players to get to know that there is creators, right, that are thinking deeply about the games and coming around and creating them. And if there is desire for something other than pure AAA, this is where it's at, right? Like there's creators actually creating games that are looking for different levels of support, all over the place, right? Is your studio still active by any chance?
You mean Inigmas Studios right now, or like Inigmas?
Are you guys still producing games, or are you guys in pause right now?
I'm working with 2 other individuals who hired me. This is I'm getting paid like about $1,000 a month too, and I'm just trying to adapt to the times to work on like art for a small mobile game right now. So it's keeping me afloat from sinking, and it's a really tough time. But no, Inigmas Games is not making anything right now. I wouldn't oppose going back to working on like Allegory, but funding doesn't just appear through thin air. But I most of the team has like moved on. At least the lead programmer's moved on, and he works at like a casino game studio in like Greensville, North Carolina, or something like that. Grover Gaming, I think. And he, if I could get funding, and I could always probably find another programmer, but he was great to work with, and if I could work with him again and offer him a competitive salary, I think I'd do it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and so you're still active, and if you were to find some level of support and funding, then you would continue development on Allegory. Is that right?
Maybe, yeah, but I'm really invested in this small like mobile game we're working on, because I've already invested like 4 or 5 months into development for like $1,000, which is not a lot compared to the salary I've made in the past. It's not about like the money as much. It's more about the game credit. And it's kind of what I was saying earlier. I can make really good art, but as a freelancer, you don't know if the studio is actually going to release their game, and you get that game credit. Otherwise, it's just art that's going on your portfolio, and that speaks, but not volumes. It says something, but it says you didn't complete a game with your art. And I really want to see this game through to the end, and then we'll see where things go. And it's not about the money either, like I said, because I could always go work at like McDonald's and probably make more than the $6.25 I'm making an hour right now. But I've like tried to play my cards right, and I have like no debt. My credit card limit's like $250 a month, which is very low. I have no children. I have low like expenses, so $1,000 keeps me afloat every month in North Carolina. And I want to see this game through. I want to show that I've gotten a credit, but I do have that striking suspicion that like, if this game releases, will it matter in the sense of the game credit? Because I don't know if I'm actually going to earn any additional like income after the game releases. I don't do rev share at all. Like I do not participate in revenue share. I think it's like a scam saying that like you're going to, hire someone for like free and then pay them once the game releases. So my guys are just paying me like $1,000 like a month, and then we'll see where things go after that. If there's going to be additional like DLC for the game or additional content where money comes in, we are trying to go for a Epic grant, but I've heard that it's like a 1 in 18 chance of like succeeding with that. Yeah. So I will see where things go. But yeah, I don't know.
I think finding opportunities for funding right now is definitely bleak. I'll ask you one thing, which is a very hard thing for someone who's running a studio maybe to answer, which is about this notion of game success and marketing. A recurring thing that I see in a lot of people is that they think that, right, what their game is missing is marketing, right? Tell me a little bit about your efforts, even in your current game or your previous games, about the role that marketing played, if it did at all. Do you feel like any of the success or failure is really responsible at marketing, or do you feel like there was something else fundamentally the reason, right, for the outcome?
With the game I'm working on right now, we've done zero marketing, at least from my understanding. We've been working like 4 months. This art style, the hand-painted art style, is significantly longer in development process. So I haven't been able to churn out lots of amazing environments and stuff like I did with Allegory, which used a more simple, low poly look, and I could instantly create art and then show people that art. So yeah, we haven't done like hardly any marketing on this. Things have been moving slow on the development side because of like life things that are going on and some of the developers on my team that I'm working with. But with Allegory, I had like a full-on dev blog that I was making every month. I was releasing, I wanted to do TikToks, but it became really hard to like develop the game, watch the team, like manage the team with producing, work on the art, and then also on the weekends make like videos, dev blogs. And I did pay like YouTube a few times, like $50 to push my video out further so people would come, and I built a small like community around it. I only had like 2,000, 3,000 subscribers at the end of like Allegory's development cycle, but that's pretty substantial. It went places. But I don't know. I think marketing was important, but I think it's really important midway to later in the game. I mean, it's hard to say because you really want to build your community for your game early on. If you just develop a really cool game, but no one knows about your game, no one's going to buy your game.
Yeah, that's probably the most common advice, is to build a community around your game. And I think that's a very, that's a good idea. But what I see in the industry is the fact that very little people actually know. Okay, so it's like, okay, I can agree to the premise, but what does that mean, right? And does that mean devlogs? Does that mean YouTube? Does that mean TikTok? And I only have a limited amount of time between development and other priorities in my life to do this. And the thing behind marketing is that, it's not something that, at least in my opinion, you can just hire someone to just do. It's not a matter of just TikTok or YouTube. It's a matter of connecting with an audience, right? So it's really supposed to be the team that's building it, conveying that passion to other people, right? And that's, at the end of the day, can't be solved by an agency or something. You can't just hire someone for $5 to $10 a month and then say run Google, Facebook.
Sometimes you have to do it yourself. You just can't afford to hire a community manager.
Yeah, and that's where I think a lot of people even fall into the thing of thinking a publisher is going to help, right? And
sometimes they do help. Sometimes the publisher handles the marketing. Most of the publishers that I was like pitching to, they had a community manager that was posting on like different social media platforms, making TikTok videos, and even now I still see like TikToks made by these publishers, and they do market their games.
But it would depend on the kind of game that's being marketed. And that's something that's actually important, because if you're building a dungeon crawler versus a puzzle versus an RPG versus, whatever, all of those things require thought to understand how to market, how to connect with the audience. And unfortunately, a lot of indies think that I can host up a Steam page and just make a post on X or Twitter, right, on the day of and hashtag indie and think like that's the end of it. But unfortunately, that's probably the beginning of it, and that should have been done much earlier.
Yeah, that's. I'm trying to find the right word without seeming brash. That's ignorant. That just means that I'll give you a really good example. When I was at Dry Cactus, so of course Dry Cactus is a good example but a bad example. It's a bad example because they already have 2 games out prior, so they already had somewhat of a community. But the good example is they reached out to streamers and content creators, and they gave them like Steam keys of their game, and were communicating with them. Of course, they had fostered like a rapport with these people, because these content creators, because they had 2 prior games. So it made it like they already knew, those content creators already knew about the Poly Ridge 1 and 2. But I think like reaching out to content creators to do your game, like cover your game in a video. Sometimes these content creators want you to pay them instead of like the money they'll get from like YouTube and stuff and the Steam key and all that.
And those are expensive, right?
Yeah.
I know content creators that, even your micro influencers, that could charge upwards of $400 a post at the low end, and that's for one like Instagram story or TikTok, small little TikTok thing. And the thing is, you have to understand, right, is that people tend to be forgetful. So even if you invest the energy, you have to keep investing back in with fresh content, fresh news, something that keeps bringing back to your game. Because how many games are releasing on Steam, and how many of them are competing for your attention, and how much time do you have? It's just a matter of you don't have time to care. So that's a huge aspect, and marketing really comes down to this very big enigma for game developers, but it strikes at the core of why you are building the game, right? So you might be building the game with your passion, your art style, and you need to figure out a way to communicate that to other people, and that's all
demographic as well.
Yeah, right. And so, like I don't know that marketing, from what I've seen, is the primary cause of a game's success or failure, but it is a necessary thing that you must do, right? Every game will almost, it's almost guaranteed to not do so well if it doesn't have a base level of marketing. Yeah, there's an exception here and there with the normal game, but just doing marketing without a great product isn't successful either. You need to have both of them in combination, and then you need to be able to connect with people. And it's not a matter of just social media or something like that. You need to really find ways to connect with people that are looking. And the thing is, what we talked about earlier, people are looking for other things than AAA. They are looking for other things. Yeah. So you have the right time right now to go and start looking at other games, right? So you have that wave, and you can start saying, hey, did you play this AAA game? Here's a way better version of, and it's only 5 to 10 hours. And so, that's an awesome experience for someone. I'll spend $10 to $20 on that, So, yeah, I think the desire to get away from AAA, the desire for indie, is just showing how the market's shifting, and we could really create much better products, right? Even though we can't make it as expansive, we can create much better products for an audience, and that's something that I always remember. I'll kind of close out with this. You have an upcoming project. The next project that you're working on is a mobile game. Feel free to kind of share a little bit about your mobile game. What is it about? When can people expect to hear about? When can people expect to see it? And I'll kind of could just have any closing thoughts after that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm working on a game called Hivebreaker by Inigmas Studios, and the game is kind of it's going to play somewhat similar in terms of like where the camera orientation is similar to like the Halo Spartan assault games on mobile, but it's going to have a twist of like tower defense added to it. So it's going to play kind of like that, and you're going to have your character, and he's going to have multiple weapon types, and you'll be able to like build different tower defense kind of things like that, fighting off waves of enemies. And I've been working on all the art for that game. So
and where can people find you if they want to get in touch with what you're doing and join together with what you're doing or follow you? Is there any channels that you want to kind of promote?
So the best way to reach me, there are, I guess, 3 different ways. You can always reach me at on Discord, it's Graham3D, but if you want to reach me in a professional capacity, look up Graham Smith on LinkedIn. I'm the studio director at Inigmas Games. And then you have my art station, which is Graham Smith Art Station. You can Google that, or if there's a link provided in here.
And I'll make sure to put up some of the links in the description so people can reach out to you if they're interested to learn more about what you're doing, and possibly even for professional opportunities. So thank you so much, Graham. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, John.
And if you guys are interested to follow Graham, he's incredibly passionate, incredibly skilled. Go check out his art station. Go check out his art on LinkedIn. He posts about it, has an amazing, unique, stylized approach. And if you're looking for something like that, he's the number one person that I recommend. But Graham is also incredibly insightful and passionate and comes from a faith-based approach. He approaches his work with a certain sense of beauty, right? And that's really important beyond just the work, is how you approach the work. And Graham is incredibly ambitious, studio founder, and he's looking to make greater impact using his faith. So thank you guys so much. And if you guys like this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you are wanting to share your story, feel free to reach out to me with the email on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Before I leave this world, I'll sing my truth, the final ode to my stolen youth. I'll paint the skies with my